All right, picture this. You're looking at a service manual, and a torque spec just stops you in your tracks. It's for a critical engine part, and it says to tighten the bolts to just 5 Newton meters. I mean, that's barely more than hand tight. How in the world could that be right? Let's get into it.
This is the exact mystery that stumps so many people, from seasoned mechanics to weekend DIYers. It goes against every single instinct you have about making something secure. I mean, an oil filter cover on an engine, why on earth would you want that bolt to feel so loose?
To really get why this is so important, let's start with what happens when things go wrong. Because if you've ever worked on an engine, you know that horrible, sinking feeling in your gut when a bolt you're tightening suddenly goes soft.
And believe me, this isn't some rare one-in-a-million accident. Tearing the threads right out of a soft aluminum engine case is an incredibly common and very expensive repair. And it all comes down to a basic misunderstanding of what those little bolts are actually supposed to be doing.
Okay, so let's tackle the biggest myth, the number one assumption people make. You see an oil filter cover, and your mind immediately jumps to the pressure it's holding back. So it seems logical, right? The bolts must be in some kind of heroic struggle against all that force.
The common thinking goes pretty much exactly like this. Okay, there's 50 psi of oil pressure pushing on this thing, so I've got to really crank down on these bolts to hold it back. It just feels intuitive, you know? More pressure has to mean more clamping force.
And you know what? That oil pressure is definitely a factor, but it's not the main reason those bolts are there. Not even close. The real story behind that ridiculously low torque spec is actually way more interesting, and it's all about how the seal itself is designed.
So here's the crucial point. The bolts, they're not the heroes of this story. The real workhorse, the part that's doing all the heavy lifting to keep the oil inside your engine, it's something much, much simpler.
It is the humble O-ring. And here's the fundamental principle you have to get. An O-ring doesn't create a seal because you've crushed it with a ton of clamping force. No, it seals by being gently compressed into a specially designed groove, creating a perfect little barrier that the oil simply can't get past.
This chart lays it out perfectly. We have this myth that more torque equals a better seal, but the reality is the O-ring is already doing all of the sealing work. We think the bolts are there to contain the pressure, when really they're just glorified placeholders. They're just holding the cover in the right spot. In fact, adding more torque isn't just useless, it's destructive. You can actually warp the filter cover, you can crush the O-ring so it can no longer seal properly, and of course you can rip those threads right out of the engine case. You cause all that damage for absolutely zero benefit.
So let's talk about the parts themselves for a second, because this is a huge piece of the puzzle. The reason this whole system is so sensitive to being over-tightened isn't an accident. It's a very deliberate engineering choice.
You basically have a perfect storm for stripping threads. You've got small M6 bolts. They're screwing into soft cast aluminum. And to top it all off, there's usually very little thread engagement. They just don't screw in that far. This combination is great for being lightweight and easy to manufacture, but it was never, ever designed to handle a lot of force.
And this is the absolute key. A manufacturer like KTM knows these threads are delicate. That 5 Newton-meter spec isn't a suggestion, it's a guardrail. It's an intentionally low number designed to stop you from applying enough force to destroy your own engine.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. Let's break down the actual numbers. Because when you see the math, it becomes crystal clear why those bolts don't need to be tight at all.
Okay, so let's start with that oil pressure we were talking about. It's pushing outwards at, let's say, an average of 50 pounds per square inch.
But, and this is a big but, that pressure is only acting on a very small area. The surface of that oil filter cover is only about 1.6 square inches.
So when you do the math, 50 psi times 1.6 square inches, you get a total outward force of only about 80 pounds, or if you prefer, around 36 kilograms. That's it.
And to put that into perspective for you, that's about the same as a 10-year-old kid standing on the cover. So yeah, it's not nothing, but it's easily managed. That pressure is distributed evenly, and it's contained almost entirely by the O-ring and the machined recess that holds the cover. The bolts are just there to keep it from rattling loose.
So let's finally solve this mystery once and for all. Why only 5 Newton meters? It's simple. The O-ring is what seals the oil, not the bolts. The cover itself is held perfectly in place by a machined recess. The bolts are literally just providing positioning force. The low torque is there to protect the soft aluminum threads, and going any higher just causes damage for absolutely no benefit.
And that leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? We've figured this whole thing out, not by blindly following a rule, but by understanding the why behind it. It really makes you wonder, what other rules are we all following, maybe in the garage or even just in life, that are based on myths we've never actually stopped to question?